Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's special edition of ARC Talks, Coffee with ARC. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lori Bulpett, and I'm the Manager of Healthcare and Education here at the Amyloidosis Research Consortium, or ARC. Today we'll be talking about ARC's history, our areas of focus, and plans for 2022 and beyond. We will present for about 30 minutes on our programs and then take roughly 10 minutes of questions. Before we get started, I would like to point out a few features of this webinar platform. First, we have found that attendees that use Google Chrome or Firefox tend to have a better experience. If you're using another browser, you may experience some audio or video issues. If that happens, please try refreshing your browser or switching to a more compatible one. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I will help address any technical issues as they arise, and my colleagues and I will address questions about today's presentation in the last 10 minutes of today's presentation. You can also resize or hide any of the content boxes to suit your preference. I will now hand things over to Isabel Lusada, ARC's CEO and founder.
Thank you so much, Laurie. And thank you all for joining us today. I'm so pleased to have some of the ARC team join me to share the work we do. We're all really passionate about our work, so we're delighted to be able to share it with some of the community today. Firstly, by way of introduction, I wanted to share what drove me to form ARC. I was indeed diagnosed with AL amyloidosis 26 years ago. In 1995, I collapsed at my wedding. Prior to that, I'd had about 10 years of slowly escalating poor health with increasing symptoms. I was diagnosed or misdiagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and immune deficiency. And in hindsight, there were many telltale symptoms of amyloidosis that either I failed to report or were missed. I had orthostatic hypertension and I would faint whenever I stood up. I had edema and would finish the day with swollen ankles. I had neuropathy in my hands and had tingling and numb fingers all the time. I also had abdominal pain, which was my liver involvement, and even shortness of breath, which was cardiac involvement. So at my wedding with my newly minted brother-in-law, who was a cardiologist, and he thought there was something more serious going on. So we actually broke up the party and ended up in the emergency room. And though it took a few months from there, that's ultimately what led to me getting diagnosed. I consider myself lucky. The reason the physician tested for amyloidosis was he thought I was Portuguese from my name, and he knew about hereditary ATTR. So he did the right test, which was the Congo red stain, but for the wrong reason. Also, my local hospital was housed the National Amyloidosis Center. When I got my diagnosis, I was absolutely terrified, but also relieved to finally know what it was and after this terrible diagnostic odyssey. I was told pretty grimly that I had 3 to 6 months to live without treatment, and there were very little treatment options. But the plan and the aim was to keep me alive long enough for a new drug that showed promise that was in development to get developed. That promise has taken 25 years. It was actually earlier this year that the first drug was approved for AL amyloidosis, daratumumab. As far as I went, I actually ended up coming to the US and had a stem cell transplant in 1996 under the care of the Boston team and Dr. Comenza. And I've been hugely fortunate that I went into complete remission. I was in the hospital for 6 months all told, and this photograph was taken in July 1996 when I was finally considered well enough to travel back to the UK. So I feel that I'm incredibly fortunate to have gone into full remission. Not only that, I've needed no further treatment, but all my organs have regained full function. The side effects of treatment were really difficult to tolerate, and I experienced much worse than symptoms of the disease. Infertility was a side effect that was barely even mentioned. And so I've been amazingly fortunate that I have gone on to build a family through adoption. We adopted 2 infants from Vietnam, and in 2005, we actually moved the family to the States. In 2007, we adopted an older child from Ethiopia. And just has been the most amazing experience in life, and I could not have wished or wanted for anything more. In 2015, I ended up creating the Amyloidosis Research Consortium. I came away from my experience really never wanting another patient to experience the fear, the loneliness, and the lack of support, and ultimately lack of treatment choices that I had. And I was also frustrated with my experience by the lack of communications between medical centers. So this is ultimately what led me to set up ARC, and that real need to address the lack of treatments. The road to drug development is full of, not only is it long, but it's full of crimps and twists and bottlenecks and dead ends. And there is much that can slow or stop promising treatments from becoming available. Many of you, like me, will have experienced a difficult diagnostic journey. In a rare disease, it's critical, particularly a progressive disease like amyloidosis, that we find ways to diagnose patients earlier so they can benefit from treatments. Clinical trials are hard to find, and they can often be very far away from patients, which can be prohibitive in patients enrolling in these studies. Clinical trial design can be really challenging. There can be difficult tests. They can also be poorly designed, so that even promising drugs don't get the results that show they're effective. The regulatory hurdles, organizations like FDA, EMA in Europe, know very little about amyloidosis, and the measures they want to see succeed can be challenging, and also ones that we don't understand with diseases that are progressive, like amyloidosis, where we don't necessarily have treatments for those. Another thing that we've been fortunate to see, or unfortunate, and combination, is that we've benefited from treatments that have been approved. And for some, that market access has been difficult. And I think there's nothing worse than if a treatment is available, not being able to access it. So these are the things that behind driving setting up ARC. The mission of ARC as a patient-focused nonprofit is to harness the power of collaboration and innovation to advance science and both improve and extend the lives of those with amyloidosis. Our model is one of collaboration, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about all the stakeholders that are involved. Patients are critical and are really important. They not only to their needs, we need to understand their needs. They have to be at the heart of driving drug development to ensure that we get the treatments that patients want. Clinical care is important. They bring the real world experience and knowledge of treating patients and are key to advancing research on improved diagnostics as well as different treatment options. Researchers need to be part of developing a prioritized research portfolio across both diagnostic tools and drug development, this whole drug development continuum. Regulatory are responsible for reviewing treatments and need to be involved earlier so that they can be part of that decision-making as clinical trials are designed, so that we have the best chance of getting drugs quickly evaluated and approved. Industry, which is the pharmaceutical industry and biotech companies, they're the ones responsible for running these trials and keeping them engaged as a way to expedite medical product development through getting their disease knowledge engaged, improved, and improving the trial design. And payers also, we need to have them engaged early so that we generate the data that's important for them to approve paying for ultimately for the treatments that patients are going to have. So we work very closely with all these stakeholders, and we have 4 particular areas that we focus on. Our 4 areas are kind of columns that we work through, improving the speed and accuracy of diagnosis. We have a number of initiatives from masterclass and different educational programs and awareness programs. We're not going to go into those today, but if you'd like to learn more, do reach out. We can tell you more about this. Increasing the understanding of the science from the biology of amyloidosis and how the disease plays out and what different parts of the disease could be targets for treatment is really critical to help us develop more treatments for amyloidosis. accelerating that regulatory approval and reimbursement of effective treatments. And our final column is this enhancing care and quality of life for patients and caregivers throughout their amyloidosis journey. This is something we'll hear more about from Laurie, and it's really important that we support patients while we do all this research. It's critical. We bring together through many different forums, all different stakeholders, the real leading experts in the world, the greatest minds within amyloidosis and also other science areas. And it's really through that that we can develop the best chance of improving outcomes for patients. So with these different groups, and here are just some snapshots of both roundtable research meetings, we have research retreats, we even take advocates to the DC to advocate for more funding. As one of the pictures here is of a meeting, big meeting at FDA. But this has really helped shape our strategy. And I'm going to talk just briefly around some of the highlights that we've achieved since we founded in 2015, and then I'm going to hand over to some of my team members. When we first launched, one of the first things we did was we created a patient survey, and over 500 patients took part in this. And what was amazing about it was it identified challenges that the field was not aware of. Most patients see on average 4 physicians and take 2 years to get diagnosed. It also showed the challenges and what those are about not having a clear pathway to diagnosis. There were others about the lack of education and information about clinical trials. And so this has really formed not only areas that we need to focus on, but areas that the rest of the community have dug in and focused on. The other thing we did was we took 130 or so patients to the FDA for what is called a patient-focused drug development meeting. This was an extraordinary meeting where patients testified to FDA about their experience with amyloidosis, both ATTR and AL amyloidosis, what mattered to them, what the challenges were, what they wanted from a treatment, what risks they were willing to take. And this really has helped shape a number of our programs. It's given a platform for subsequent drugs to be reviewed and has really helped in their approval. And it also ultimately led to us being invited to create a partnership with FDA, which you'll hear more about. We have developed a tool called MAP, you'll hear a bit more about that, which connects patients with clinical trials. We started in 2015 with an international roundtable, research roundtable, and that really identified the most pressing needs, which were published and are things that really fed into our strategic plan. We developed clinician guidelines, which have helped the different types of physicians, from cardiologists to neurologists, when you should suspect and how to diagnose ATTR amyloidosis. We did, as treatments became available, we did a lot of work to support market access. So developing studies that really showed what the burden of disease was, the data that was needed to support reimbursement. And along with that, we developed what's called a health technology assessment toolkit. The health technology assessment is a process that happens a lot with other countries outside of the US. And this was a toolkit so other patient advocacy organizations could take the data and would know how to work with these groups to ensure that these drugs became available. We're going to hear more from my colleague about the Amyloidosis Forum and also a new initiative that we've started this year, the Industry Collaborative. So I am delighted to hand over to Kristen, who's the Executive Director of Research, to tell you in detail about a few of our research programs. Kristen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Sue, and I'm the Executive Director of Research here at ARC. My background is actually in drug development. Before joining ARC 5 years ago, my career had been focused on planning and executing clinical trials across a number of different disease spaces. I worked for a long time in Alzheimer's disease and learned a ton about protein misfolding disorders during that time, and then transitioned to focusing on rare and ultra-rare diseases. There are so many unique challenges and complexities that come with research in rare disease, and it ultimately all boils down to really better understanding what patients are going through, what their disease is, how they are experiencing it, how it impacts them, and how they might be different from any other patient with the same disease. and then ultimately how we can learn from them and better use that understanding to better develop effective treatments for patients. That's what drew me to ARC and what drives our research initiatives today. It is amazing to step back and see just how many new drugs have recently been approved and are in development for AL and TTR amyloidosis. This slide looked very different even just a few short years ago, with multiple drugs approved represented by the orange bars and so many new drugs coming into development represented by the blue bars. And this doesn't even account for all the drugs that are in early preclinical development stages. This slide points to a few things for me. First is just how active and engaged the amyloidosis patient community is and has been over the years to support and prompt this volume of product discovery and development. Secondly, I think it highlights just how much unmet need there continues to be in spite of multiple approved products. Each type of amyloidosis is a complex and challenging disease to treat, and no two patients are alike. There is still so much to do to help amyloidosis patients live full and active lives. Now, with this many companies and experts studying and developing drugs for amyloidosis, we've learned a lot along the way. With that said, we need to do better when it comes to maximizing our resources and leveraging the best minds across the community to help improve the way we're studying and bringing effective drugs to patients. This concept is the backbone of ARC's public-private partnership with the FDA, called the Amyloidosis Forum. ARC entered into this public-private partnership with the FDA back in 2019. Now, a public-private partnership is a collaboration between multiple stakeholder organizations, including at least one nonprofit organization, to achieve a shared goal that's beyond the capability of any one stakeholder. What the forum allows us to do is bring together the entire amyloidosis community, patients, clinicians, researchers, industry, FDA, and other global regulatory bodies, to come together and partner on key initiatives that are designed to help improve upon and speed up how quickly we can bring new, safe, and efficacious drugs to the hands of patients with amyloidosis. Our public-private partnership liaison within the FDA initially described this to me as bringing together the best minds in amyloidosis to do good things for patients. And it's a simple concept that exemplifies how we work. The forum initially began with a focus on AL amyloidosis. Like other types of amyloidosis, AL amyloidosis is such a complex disease. Patients experience very different levels of organ involvement, and the drugs that are being developed are designed to do different things. Some are designed to stop protein from misfolding and depositing on organs, and others are designed to remove the protein that has deposited already. All of this makes it really challenging to design trials that are meaningful to a broad range of patients and achievable from both a clinical and regulatory standpoint. The work that's done within the forum is done at a really highly scientific level, but I'm going to walk you through one of our current programs, designing a multi-domain endpoint. Now, an endpoint is an event or something that can be measured objectively to determine whether a treatment being studied in a clinical trial is beneficial. It's usually something that measures whether patients feel better, function better, or live longer. In many cases, endpoints are directly related to a single organ that might be affected by a disease. Now, a multi-domain endpoint, on the other hand, is an endpoint that considers changes that a treatment may have on several different affected organs, like your heart, your kidney, your liver, within a disease. The goal behind developing this type of endpoint is to better take into account each AL amyloidosis patient's unique experience with the disease, and ultimately to speed up drug development. A multi-domain endpoint can allow for enrollment of a broader patient population, earlier detection of treatment effects in clinical trials, and potentially allow for shorter follow-up within trials. Now, on the flip side, we're also focusing on how we can bring together data from different clinical trials that have completed over the years and analyze those data together to answer important questions that can help speed up clinical drug development. This is a process called federated data analytics, and something we've been building through the Amyloidosis Forum. NT-proBNP, as an example, is an important cardiac biomarker that's commonly used in AL amyloidosis. And by analyzing it uniformly across multiple clinical trials through federated data analytics, we hope to be able to evaluate whether it could be used as an endpoint in AL amyloidosis trials, which would ultimately hopefully speed up how quickly these trials could be conducted. all of this work requires tremendous participation across the community, and we are so grateful to have had the involvement of so many regulators, clinicians, industry companies, and more. We're looking forward to continuing this endpoint development work in 2022 and launching a new series of work to focus on TTR amyloidosis as well. Now, I want to shift gears slightly and focus on some of the work we've been doing to better embed the patient experience with amyloidosis into other ongoing areas of research. You will probably at some point have been asked to fill out a form with check boxes when you're at your doctor's appointments or if you've participated within a clinical trial. These questionnaires are called patient-reported outcome measures, or PROs. A PRO measure is an instrument or a questionnaire that's used to collect information about a patient's health condition directly from the patient. PROs provide really important insights into patient experience of a disease, and they're valuable tools to use in both clinical practice and in research. Well, not uncommon in rare disease, the PROs that have been used in amyloidosis clinical trials to date have been developed for other diseases and are only borrowed for amyloidosis. A good example of this is that the survey commonly used to assess neuropathy in TTR amyloidosis trials was actually developed for diabetes. Diabetic neuropathy is very different than the neuropathy that patients with TTR amyloidosis experience, and it's only a small part of what they go through. Because amyloidosis affects more than one organ, it is so important to look more holistically at patients in order to have a complete understanding of what the patient experience is of this disease. When ARC held the patient-focused drug development meeting in 2015 that Isabel mentioned, many of the patients with hereditary TTR amyloidosis described that the worst symptoms they experienced were uncontrollable diarrhea. Yet this and other symptoms that are really impacted patients' lives were not being measured as part of their care and in the development of new treatments. Similarly, when FDA and other groups who advised on the cost of recent TTR drugs reviewed the data collected within the clinical trials, there was uncertainty around just how effective the drugs were, because the questionnaires that were used during the trials were only measuring a small part of the disease. For these reasons, ARC has spent the last several years working with a team of experts at Quality Metric to develop a PRO measure called the Transthyretin Amyloidosis Quality of Life Questionnaire, or the ATTR QOL for short. This PRO is specifically designed for patients with all types of TTR amyloidosis. The ATTR QOL measures the frequency and severity of 32 symptoms and assesses impacts on physical, social, emotional, and role functioning. Altogether, more than 70 patients, clinicians, patient representatives, and drug developers participated in this rigorous development process. The ATTR QOL represents an important advancement in patient-centered amyloidosis research. It provides the field of TTR amyloidosis with a single questionnaire that covers all types of TTR amyloidosis and symptoms, and it was designed to be used in both clinical practice and in clinical trials. We are so excited to get this tool into the hands of researchers conducting trials in TTR amyloidosis, and are even more excited to see it generate data that better describes what TTR amyloidosis patients and their families are experiencing every day. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Vanessa.
Thanks, Kristen, and thanks again to all of you for tuning in to spend time with ARC today. So as mentioned, I am Vanessa Boulanger, Executive Director of Strategic Partnerships, and one of the newer members of ARC's team. I joined ARC in May of this year from NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders, where I spent a number of years leading the research and scientific work for the organization. My background is in public health and international development, which means that I love to build community and bring people together. I believe that health is a human right, and I think that innovation and new ways of doing things can only happen when you have people with different viewpoints and backgrounds listening and learning from one another. This forms the foundation of all of the rare disease work that I do at ARC to center the amyloidosis community. I do some of my best thinking while I'm knitting and baking, less so when I'm running around after my 2 young children who you can see here. So we heard earlier from both Isabel and Kristen about the significant growth that there has been over the past few years for the amyloidosis field. Now that we have drugs approved that will stop or slow disease progression, significant resources and investment from companies, and expanding expertise in amyloidosis, we're at a really pivotal moment as a community. There is such a need and a huge opportunity now that we have treatments to get patients diagnosed early, even before symptoms begin, in order to preserve the highest quality of life possible. So the idea here on this slide, collective impact, is to get leaders moving in the same direction, bring alignment in resources and expertise to drive forward shared priorities or areas of focus, and then to hold each other accountable to deliver on our commitments. So one of the ways that ARC is doing this is through our exciting new initiative, the Aspire Amyloidosis Industry Collaborative, to demonstrate what can be done when leaders do work together. It's not typical practice for pharmaceutical companies to come together and work collaboratively toward a shared mission. These companies have a different mandate and tend to operate in a competitive space. And what can happen, or what we may see, is overlap in some of the efforts, programs, and services that are provided, even if they're working on complementary treatments. So this can significantly slow progress and create inefficiencies in the use of already limited resources, in addition to creating high demand for patients and families who are asked to participate repeatedly in similar data collection or research efforts. So ARC as a patient organization is in a really unique position to facilitate and bring together companies working on amyloidosis to address urgent needs in 3 key areas. Diagnosis, so getting patients diagnosed faster, earlier, and more accurately, which we know improves people's quality of life. Expanding access to excellent care and developing approaches that center each amyloidosis patient's right to quality health services. And looking at health disparities. There are significant demographic and geographic differences that impact how people experience a diagnosis of amyloidosis. So looking at these gaps to begin to meet the needs of all amyloidosis patients. Where this type of a collaborative model has been put into place in other disease communities, we've seen over and over again significant advancements in progress and reductions in timelines for unlocking new approaches. We're eager to share updates with you all about the Aspire Amyloidosis Industry Collaborative, so do keep an eye out for announcements in 2022 as we officially launch the program and share more about our specific areas of work. Okay, so I've shared with you the why, alignment and collective impact, the what, collaborative partnership model, and now the who. I'm really pleased to share this slide with you to show the level of engagement and commitment that we have in Aspire. We have 12 of the leading companies as our members who have committed to coming together to move beyond barriers and work toward a vision where all amyloidosis patients are diagnosed as early as possible, treated with the highest quality of care, and where no one in our community is left behind. It has been remarkable to see the incredibly high level of interest and commitment from our members to really shift things positively for the amyloidosis community. Ultimately, it's really about having the sum of our work together be much greater and more impactful than each individual or independent part. So thanks so much again for joining us. It really is a privilege to work with you each day. I'm excited about our new endeavor, Aspire, and would be happy to set up time to talk further if you have any questions or feedback. I know that was a pretty brief overview. And now I'm so delighted to turn it over to my colleague, Lori Bulpett, who many of you know and have already connected with directly. And you'll hear from her about all of our wonderful patient programs.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And I just wanted to point out to my other colleagues that we do have a request if speakers could speak slower. We have a few non-English speakers listening in. So yes, I see that request and we will do so. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Lori Bulpett and I'm the Manager of Healthcare and Education at the Amyloidosis Research Consortium, and I handle our patient and healthcare provider programs. And I wanted to share this photo of me with my dog, Alice. My educational background is also in public health, and I have previously worked in private practice and pharmaceutical companies and have prior involvement with rare disease populations. Through my experiences, I have developed a strong passion for helping others and providing support wherever I can. Patients who connect with disease-specific organizations have been shown to do better overall than those who don't, and there are a few reasons for this. Patients feel intimidated by complex medical terminology presented to them at their physician's offices and can miss out on the opportunities to ask critical questions. Another reason is that a diagnosis of a rare disease like amyloidosis is isolating and overwhelming, especially if you've never heard the word amyloidosis before and your family and friends likely haven't either. But receiving support throughout your journey can make you feel like you've got a team behind you every step of the way. And that's one of the main things I'm here to do, is to provide that support. We work hard to ensure that patients feel informed about their disease and treatment options and empowered to communicate their needs to their healthcare team. We have a number of different ways in which patients and their families can get in touch with ARC for guidance and support, including phone, email, and even social media. And we're always happy to help provide them with the information that they need. ARC is also committed to ensuring that patients have access to quality, up-to-date information. We have educational booklets with detailed disease and treatment information, with more resources always in development. And I actually have a couple of booklets here with me to show you some examples. And if anyone would like a printed copy, feel free to contact ARC and we'd be happy to send one out to you. We also have ARC Talks, which is our informational webinar series that we present in a live format such as this, so that patients can hear directly from expert speakers and ask them questions. ARC Talks covers in-depth symptom management, disease information, treatments, and more. The webinar topics are often informed by patients. So whether we hear of a common theme of questions being asked or receive a direct suggestion. So these educational materials and more can be accessed on the Patient Hub on our website. And I've included a link to the Patient Hub in the related content section of this platform. So that should be the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. ARC also developed a unique tool which helps patients find treatment centers, clinical trials, and more. I'd like to hand it back over to Kristen to talk to you more about this tool and other opportunities to participate in research.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori. So like Lori mentioned, ARC has developed an online tool called My Amyloidosis Pathfinder, or MAP for short, to help patients with amyloidosis get connected to treatment centers and clinical trials specific to their type of amyloidosis and their symptoms. You can access MAP by clicking on the related content panel within the webinar. Once you access the system and sign up, patients and caregivers will sign up as new users and then answer a few short questions about your amyloidosis. Once your profile is completed, you'll be able to find and compare amyloidosis treatment centers that suit your needs and also get matched to clinical trials that you might qualify for based off of your amyloidosis profile. MAP presents studies to patients in an accessible and focused way so that patients can get a better understanding of what might be involved in a particular study and why it might be important to participate. MAP is a great way to stay informed of and get involved with clinical trials, which ultimately helps advance research towards better treatments and a cure for amyloidosis. Another way you can play an important role in research is by sharing your perspectives and experiences through ARC-led research initiatives. ARC routinely conducts patient surveys, studies, patient panels, and focus groups throughout the year with a goal of understanding patient experiences. The purpose of these initiatives can vary from gaining patient perspectives on their journey to diagnosis, to reviewing planned research or clinical trials, to evaluating the benefit risk that patients might be willing to take with different types of treatments. Now, if you're interested in participating in any of these types of research efforts, we've also linked within the related content or the related information, a participant contact form where you can sign up and be contacted as we are looking to recruit patients and caregivers for various projects. We are so grateful to all the patients and caregivers who have contributed to each of our studies, panels, and focus groups to date. And we're always hoping to connect with new folks as we move forward. Now, an example of a study that we're currently conducting is an online survey of patients and caregivers of patients living with hereditary or wild-type TTR amyloidosis. Now, given that there have recently been a number of new drugs approved for TTR amyloidosis over the past few years, we're hoping to better understand what the actual cost of these treatments are to TTR patients and the impact these costs may have on both them and their families. This is such an important issue, and I see a lot of questions actually coming through the Q&A about the cost of current therapies. And so one of the things that's really important that we do is generate data around what the actual cost of treatment is to patients and their loved ones, and then use that data to inform and advocate for improved access to care for all patients. Now, this survey is completely anonymous, so if you're a TTR patient or a caregiver of a TTR patient, I would encourage you to consider clicking on the link within the related content panel. Read a little bit more about the study, find out if you're eligible, and if you're interested, consider participating. You can always feel free to reach out to any of us at ARC if you have any questions. So far, we've had more than 300 patients and caregivers complete this survey to date. And so if you've already participated, thank you so much for sharing your experience and perspectives on this. Whether you are paying $0 for your treatment or whether you're paying thousands of dollars for your treatment or anywhere in between, it's so important that we collect everybody's perspectives on this. Now with that, I'd like to hand it back over to Isabel so that she can wrap up and recap how folks can get involved with ARC moving forward. Isabel, you might be on mute.
Thank you. So thank you, Kristen, Vanessa, and Laurie, for sharing your work at ARC. We have so many more programs and projects we're doing, and we love talking about our work. So if there's anything more you'd like to learn, please contact us. I truly believe that together we can beat amyloidosis, and there are ways for everybody to get engaged and involved and take part. We have, as Kristen mentioned, patient panels and we do different surveys, different studies. There is a role for everybody. And we are a nonprofit. We rely on support and funding from people in the community. And so if that's something you're able to do, there is a link, I believe, in the resources. Raising awareness is also critically important, and there are a number of different ways that you can get involved to do that. Sharing information, retweeting if you're on social media, sharing social media posts, even holding a community event or a dinner to share information is really important. We've had some great awareness campaigns, and we're going to be relaunching one next year that was very successful, where patients identified physicians that had missed the diagnosis, and we connect with them, we share educational materials. And this is really important. It's often something that's not done. And a great example of the impact it can have is that Janet Woodcock, who we saw a picture of earlier, who is the head director of the FDA, when she was a clinician, she missed an amyloidosis patient. That patient came back a number of times with worsening symptoms as their organs got involved. And she has never forgotten that. And that's really led to her being interested in amyloidosis. It opened the gateway for us to have the patient meeting and ultimately create this the forum. So we can really make a difference through our initiatives. And we're happy to talk more about those. I do want to spend the next few minutes that we have and open up to some questions. We've had a lot of questions come in, and quite a number of those are about personal experiences. One of the things that I would say which makes amyloidosis particularly challenging is that every patient is different. And so instead of going into different specific cases, anybody who's asked a question around their own experience, we'll reach out to them. Laurie will reach out to you and connect and provide you with the information that you're looking for. I know we had a question, a couple of questions around cost of drugs, and I think that's something that we are really actively addressing. One of the things we pride ourselves in at ARC, and I believe is in part responsible for the success we've had, is that speaking to a scientific world and a payer world, data is what matters. Individual patient stories are very important, but we also need the data to show the impact. So the studies we do that really generate the data to accompany the patient voice is really, really critical. Kristen, I'd love to get you back on for a moment and to talk about, first of all, it'd be great if you can just talk about what drugs have been approved and are commercially available for both ATTR and AL. And then also, as we look at new treatments being talked about in studies, what is just in generally, I know you can't speak specifically, we don't have details for a specific trial, but what does that drug development timeline look like? And how many years roughly and what phases are there of clinical trials?
Yeah, sure. So to start with the currently approved drugs, so in the TTR space, there have been 3 drugs that have been approved over the past few years, which is pretty phenomenal, and even more exciting how many continue to be in development. For hereditary TTR patients who have polyneuropathy, there are 2 drugs that are currently approved. Patisiran, or Onpattro, is the commercial name, and then inotersen or Tegsedi is the commercial name. And both of those products are approved for hereditary TTR patients with polyneuropathy. For patients who have either hereditary or wild-type TTR amyloidosis with cardiomyopathy, currently tafamidis or Vyndamax is currently approved in the US. And if you're in a different country or region, some of these approvals may vary slightly, but specifically for the US, those 3 drugs are approved for TTR amyloidosis. On the AL side of things, as Isabel mentioned, I think at the start of the call, Darzalex or daratumumab has recently been approved for AL amyloidosis earlier this year. So those are the 4 drugs that are currently approved. In terms of the drugs that are currently under development, developing a drug is a really timely and long process. So there are 4 phases of drug development: phase 1 studies, phase 2, phase 3, and then phase 4, which is more of a post-marketing after a drug has been approved piece. It can take 10 to 15 years for some drugs to get through from phase 1 all the way to approval and then into phase 4 studies. So your phase 1 studies are typically very small studies. Depending on the indication, they can be short studies. They can also be quite long and lengthy study too. But it's really looking at the safety of a drug, the tolerability, and potentially some dose finding. So trying to identify like a target dose. Phase 2 studies are where you'll start to collect some information about whether the drug is actually working, whether it's doing anything for the patients. Those will include a higher number of patients, typically be longer studies than phase 1, yeah, that's kind of what a phase 2 study is. And then for phase 3 studies, and phase 2 studies can still be looking at multiple doses. That was what I was trying to remember what I was about to say. And then phase 3 studies, you typically have narrowed down 1, possibly 2 different doses that you're studying, and you're really looking at large numbers of patients for a given population. These are long studies, and you're really looking to see whether the drug, you're continuing to see safety with the drug, and also whether the drug is actually working for patients.
Excellent, thank you. Vanessa, I think, here you've come from working at NORD, the National Organization for Rare Diseases. There are over 7,000 rare diseases, and it'd be great to hear just your opinion about what really can make a difference in raising awareness, what patients individually, organizations, and communities can learn from one another.
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think I can distill it down maybe into 4 points. I think the first is really around bringing the community together. So being that trusted leader who is in a position to represent individual patients in all different types of settings. There's a lot of power in building relationships. It allows patient organizations to serve and also be better positioned to raise awareness. So it kind of, comes down to bringing the community together, and then there's power and volume in terms of, how loud you can be in a space when you have numbers with you. You mentioned this point a bit earlier, Isabel, but I think evidence is another key piece. So having documented evidence of what it's like to live with the rare disease that you're focused on, what the key challenges are. So really just collecting that data, even if it's preliminary, it really helps you to build partnerships, collaborations. It's a great way to have a deeper conversation and start to stand out with researchers and scientists. It's a way to speak a common language and communicate urgency. And then I would say that the rare disease community is often at the cutting edge of process and research and science. So just not being afraid to push for things to be done differently, but also not being afraid to sort of try, fail, learn, and then start again. And then I think my last piece is just the buddy system. There's so many mentors who really have been there before. They've been, in the position you're in, they've moved beyond it. They're often quite generous with their insight, experience, guidance. There's a real wealth of expertise in the community. So building some mentorship type partnerships can be really useful for sharing information and tools. And you may find that you don't have to reinvent every single process as you're stepping into this space to support patients.
Absolutely. And speaking of the buddy system, I think it's something, see, it's something that we've been asked that is, I'm a patient and I'd like to speak to somebody else who's in a similar position to me. And I think that's something that can be incredibly helpful. And if you are interested in speaking to somebody who might have the same type of amyloidosis, who might be going through similar treatment, Laurie is happy to facilitate an introduction. And Laurie, are there other ways that patients could share if they have ideas for resources or webinars or get more engaged with ARC?
Yes, absolutely. Hearing from patients and hearing their experiences and ideas really gives us some great ideas for programs and topics for educational materials. So I would encourage anyone who has, would like more information on this, or I can't find information in my research that I'm looking for on a certain topic. So definitely send those suggestions our way. We always take those into consideration. The email that's linked with each of our bios is actually our direct email. So if you wanted to get in touch with any of us directly, feel free to click on the email that's associated with our photos. And for suggestions like that, you can email me directly.
Thank you, Laurie. I know we're at the end of our time, and there are a couple of questions I'm briefly going to touch on. One was around COVID and rare diseases. And we have worked very closely with the larger rare disease organizations. We've worked closely with policymakers on the Hill and also with FDA to ensure that rare disease patients are accounted for when we look at the impact of COVID. Well, that's something that's been really instrumental is being able to have remote care and how that's affected and helped patients. And actually what we're working on now is ensuring that as COVID rules are sort of reeled back, that these are options. Some of the things were really beneficial, that these could stay in place and work across state lines and the like. There are guidelines produced by the International Society of Amyloidosis about having the COVID vaccine, and all indications are that it is safe to have. If you're immunocompromised, you may want to check with your physician about whether you should have additional doses or what the current recommendations are. And so on that note, there was one last comment. Do we work equally in AL and ATTR? We very much do. We are very excited when we started the forum that it was focused on AL because there was a lot of activity with companies about to submit their drugs for approval with FDA in the ATTR space. And so we were advised to hold back as we established the forum. Now, in 2022, we will be opening up the forum to include ATTR, and we're also doing some work on other rarer types of amyloidosis. So to wrap up, I just thought as we're heading out of the year and into the next year, I'd love to hear from each team member about what you're excited for the next year at ARC. And so, Kristen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I am really excited to see the endpoint development work that we've been doing in AL amyloidosis through the forum continue, and to see the federated data analytics program grow, being able to pilot it on a project like evaluating NT-proBNP in AL amyloidosis, which has been, I think fair to say widely debated over the years, is a really exciting opportunity. And so really grateful to the teams that are contributing data to that process, and looking forward to growing that. I'm also really looking forward to one of the things we'll be starting this year is launching an annual community survey. So something where we're routinely year over year reaching out to the entire community to collect patient perspectives. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
Absolutely. And I think the exciting thing about the federated data analysis is that it gives the opportunity to study all sorts of endpoints, ones that we currently think might be viable, ones that we don't even know about. So it really opens the doorway to look at things. Laurie.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. In 2021, we did a soft launch of a nursing group to really focus efforts on education and awareness within the nursing community, as well as continue to develop more materials for patients as well. And we have a really great group of nurses who are so dedicated to this group, and I'm really excited for what 2022 is going to bring us. We have some great plans.
How about you, Vanessa?
Yes, I'll just be very brief. I'm looking forward to the official launch of the Aspire Amyloidosis Industry Collaborative. We have a number of really ambitious plans for 2022 and some working groups getting set up. So it'll be exciting to share with you the outcomes from some of our initial demonstration projects. So I'm eager to keep that momentum going.
Excellent, thank you. And I would say for myself, I am excited by all the work that we're doing within ARC and as a community as a whole, because ultimately what we need to get to is there needs to be a treatment for each patient, and we need to understand what is that right treatment so that each patient is given the right treatment at the right time, and amyloidosis becomes a highly treatable disease. And I think we can get there, and I think, I certainly know the team at ARC, we won't stop until we do. So thank you all for attending today. We look forward to our continued relationship with you and working with you, and please reach out for anything at all. Thank you.